Great. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I know a number of you were with us yesterday. Thank you so much for allocating the time to join us again today. For those of you who were not with us yesterday, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Haley Ross, and I work with the Columbia Mountains Institute. And I'm going to kick us off, and then I will hand you over to the folks that you're truly here to listen to today. And I know that some of you heard some of my intro yesterday, but for those of you who did miss it and might be joining us for the first time, I just want to make sure you recognize that this is a collaborative effort, and we are in partnership with the BC Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, the Invasive Species Council of BC, the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society, the Central Kootenay Invasive Species Society, the East Kootenay Invasive Species Council, and Mass Environmental. So collectively, we bring you this training over the next couple days. And thanks to the sponsors who I would like to recognize next, we've been able to offer this training for free. So that is Columbia Power, Fortis BC, the FWCP, so that's the Fish and Wild Compensation Program, CICUS, ECISC, and Poisson Consulting. So many thanks to those organizations who've supported us. And just like yesterday, I think it's important for all of us who are working in land stewardship and land management in various ways to recognize the territories in which we do our work. So for myself and for the Columbia Mountains Institute, we acknowledge that we are doing our work in the unceded territories of the Sinixt, the Shakwapham, the Tinaja, and the Syilx Okanagan peoples. And if you weren't with us yesterday, I want to welcome you to open your chat and introduce yourself right now. Tell us where you're zooming in from, and please feel welcome to provide your own land acknowledgement. If you did that yesterday, you don't have to repeat that, but you are welcomed to. Regardless, I recommend that everybody open their chat right now because that tool will be helpful to you as we proceed over the next few hours. So I'm going to run through some housekeeping to you. They'll be posted on the event webpage. Yesterday's recording has already been posted there. And I wanted to just add a little note that yesterday we noticed that somebody had turned on an AI note taker. Despite my attempts, I'll say, to curtail that. The event is being recorded. That recording is going to be available to you for a long period of time. So if you need to revisit the material, I suggest that you go about it that route. If you could not turn on AI note takers and those sorts of things during this event this morning, we'd be grateful. Thanks very much. Okay, so I see that most people have their cameras off. Thanks for that. I'm going to recommend that unless you're speaking, we keep our cameras off. And this is just going to safeguard our internet connection for the folks who don't have as robust an internet connection as some of us. Please stay muted. As you have come into the space, you're already muted. We'll stay muted just to cut down on distractions for our speakers. And I want to talk about questions. So we encourage you to ask your questions. That's why you're here and you're able to participate. It's the benefit of being here for the live delivery of this talk. To ask your questions, you can put them into the chat, and you can feel welcome to add your questions into the chat as they occur to you. We are going to relay those questions to our speakers at the breaks or at the designated Q&A times. If you see a question in the chat that you are interested in or you would really like to hear the answer to as well, give that question a thumbs up, and that helps us to prioritize our time and make sure that we pose the questions that are most popular, so to speak. All right, so our plan today. So like I said, we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive into what we can do about whirling disease. We're going to be talking about best management practices, decontamination protocols, and strategies for mitigating risk and preventing whirling disease. And then we're also going to be learning more about the province of BC's strategic outlook. And then after that, we're going to be doing a bit of a breakout session discussion where we'll be in the hands of the CSIS and the CICUS crew, and we'll be talking about education and outreach and gathering your mind and your ideas and having a nice discussion, and then we'll be reporting out. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Martina Beck and David DePape. I'm going to read their bios shortly, just like I did yesterday, and then they will take over. So I'll start with Martina, who will be speaking first. She's the Freshwater Applied Science and Invasive Units Head with the BC Ministry of Water, Land, and Resource Stewardship. Martina oversees the ministry's Science and Strategy Policy Unit for Aquatic Invasive Animals, which includes the shared delivery of BC Invasive Mussel Defense Program. Martina completed MSc studies at the Aquatic Invasive Species Research, in Aquatic Invasive Species Research at the University of Victoria. And then we also will be hearing again from David DePop. And David is an aquatic, or Dave, I should say, is an aquatic biologist and senior resource manager with over 40 years experience in fisheries management and restoration, who is now semi-retired and living on Vancouver Island. Until recently, he's worked with government and senior management in it. Sorry, I'm really mumbling my words this morning. He's worked within government in a senior management capacity with fish habitat restoration initiatives. Following the outbreak of whirling disease in Alberta in 2016, David led the research, subsequent development, and implementation of decontamination protocols and procedures for the Alberta government as a member of the Provincial Whirling Disease Task Force. All right, that's all from my mumbly self. Apologies. Martina, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Haley. Just confirming you can see my screen now?
I can now, yep.
Great. Thank you. Well, good morning and welcome back as we kick things off for day 2 of the online session. I know there was a lot of information delivered yesterday. We're going to continue that theme and provide lots more information here today. So I'm going to kick things off, and the theme, as Haley mentioned, for this morning session is going to be deeper dive into what can we do about it. So we referenced yesterday a number of times some measures like clean, drain, dry, and decontamination. And so the focus for this morning's session is going to be really diving into what do we mean when we're kind of referencing these different preventative tools. Before I dive into some of the kind of best management practices, just wanted to do a little bit of a recap from yesterday. As I mentioned, lots of great information provided, but just wanted to quickly kind of circle back to just kind of on the theme of how does it spread and what can we do about it. So just coming back to what we talked about yesterday, and Dave gave a great overview of the life cycle and what does that mean in terms of how it can spread. So we talked about those spores that are released into the water. So what this means is that the movement of fish, mud, water can spread whirling disease. And that's because once these spores are released into the environment, they have the potential to attach onto things. So activities like swimming, boating, different types of water equipment being used in the water could potentially cause the attachment of the spores, as well as if you're picking up water or mud in your gear or boat and then moving between water bodies. So we touched on that. It's fish that are infected by the parasite, and so there are no human health concerns. And we did talk about with the complex life cycle, the two-host life cycle. What this means is that treatment in wild systems is very difficult, and essentially there are no treatment options currently available. And so that's really why we want to focus on containment and prevention. And so that's where we're going to be really focusing the next few sessions on this morning. And so some of the general best management practices for whirling disease. So the first being that never to move fish or fish parts from one water body to another. So in British Columbia, it is prohibited to move live fish. So, and also the use of live bait is prohibited. There are some exemptions for certain types of bait, but generally the use of live bait is also prohibited. So these are key measures that can help, of course, mitigate the movement of fish. But just in terms of if you are fishing and you're catching fish, wherever possible, using tools like fish cleaning stations, or making sure that when you're disposing of fish, that you're not disposing of them down like the kitchen garburator, so that you're properly disposing them on a solid waste system. so that there isn't the risk that when it's going down in through different things like down your kitchen sink, there isn't that risk that it could then further distribute into systems. This was touched on a little bit yesterday, but strongly discouraging the use of the felt-soled waders. So fortunately, there are a number of alternatives available on the market. So the use of rubber-soled alternatives, so the rubber-soled boots, and this makes it just a lot easier to clean. So that felt-soled is a known potential vector for spreading not only whirling disease, but other aquatic invasive species. So really encouraging that use of the alternatives. It makes it much easier to be able to take the steps to do clean, drain, dry to really minimize that risk that things like water and mud can stay attached on. And this is where I'm going to dive into more detail. We've mentioned a number of times the practice of clean, drain, dry. And so that's really what I'm going to focus on here. So what is clean, drain, dry? So clean, drain, dry is a step that we want to be taking anytime we're moving, whether it's boats, equipment, fishing gear, really just getting in the routine, the habit of practicing clean, drain, dry when moving any type of gear from one water body to another. And this is really intended to be an everyday practice. It doesn't need to involve specialized equipment. It's really just a routine step that can be taken. So the first step of clean is making sure that you're inspecting whether it's your equipment or your boat, and removing all the mud, sand, plant material before leaving the shore. And then at a location away from a waterway is when you want to actually be washing it down. So we want to be doing that in a location where there isn't a chance that the water from the boat could basically go back into a waterway. So wherever possible, somewhere like a gravel lot, a parking lot where there isn't like a storm drain where the water can run off to. If you aren't able to do it right on site, it could be done, say, at your home when you get back home, if you're not planning to relaunch it anytime soon. So it doesn't necessarily always have to happen right at that immediate spot, depending on what your kind of next use is for that boat or equipment. And so that's when you're going to wash down your boat. And this can be done using a garden hose. You can use things like sponges and things to clean things off. And then the next step is the drain. So before leaving the shoreline, draining all the water from the watercraft or equipment. This is where the pull the plug requirement comes in. So if your boat has a drain plug, when you remove it right at shore to drain, making sure that you're not putting the drain plug back in until you're relaunching your boat. So if you're going to be transporting that boat over land, keeping that drain plug out. And what that does is it can allow it to continue to fully drain while it's in transit. And then the last step is drying. So ideally, if possible, having enough time between uses for the equipment or boat to completely dry between trips. We don't have a specific dry time set here. This is because depending on the outdoor conditions, so what air temperature is, it can really vary how long is needed, depending also too on different species. So generally we just say, try to allow it to completely dry. And so whether that's 24 hours or 48 hours, and really as much as possible. And so that's where if you can leave it out in an area, if it's nice and sunny, that can help obviously expedite that dry step. And of course, leaving all your compartments open. And ideally, if you can remove things like life jackets and that to allow them to also fully dry out before the next use. So those are, of course, the three main steps for clean, drain, dry. And again, this is really intended to be a step that's done after every use. And so Dave is going to be diving into decontamination and what that looks like for whirling disease. And so just wanted to touch on kind of when we're talking about clean, drain, dry versus decontamination. Clean, drain, dry, as I mentioned, is really a step that should be taken after every use. Generally doesn't require specialized equipment. You're not needing to use any type of chemical or any specialized equipment versus decontamination is being applied when we're in operating in an area that's identified as higher risk. And I'll talk on the next slide about what that currently is here in BC. So that's where you are coming from a known area where there's potential elevated risk, and where we start getting into more specific steps that are being taken to decontaminate. So clean, drain, dry is an everyday practice, should be done province-wide, no matter where you're operating in. And then decontamination is something that we're recommending once you are in certain areas, which I will touch on now. So that really brings here. So I touched on this yesterday, but just really wanted to reiterate. So for BC, Dave spoke yesterday about how Alberta had the different zones, the high, medium, and low risk zones. For us here in BC, when we look at the Whirling disease decontamination protocol for all sort of water users, it's recommended within the Columbia River watershed. So I showed this map a number of times yesterday. Just wanted to bring it up here again today. So if you're operating within, and I'll just clarify that it's the broader area along here. So this kind of gray area here being the Columbia River watershed. I'm sure most folks on joining today are familiar with this area. That's where we are recommending, encouraging, following the Whirling disease decontamination protocol. We do have it as a requirement for government staff, government contractors, and it's part of requirement for any water-based permits within that region. And then, as I just mentioned, province-wide, continuing to always practice clean, drain, dry, and being aware of the pull the plug requirement. And I just wanted to touch on some resources that we have. So I mentioned these a little bit yesterday. So this here is the link to our Whirling disease website. And on that website is where you can access the provincial decontamination protocol. It's essentially mirrored from the Alberta one. So it's following the same recommendations of either a bleach concentration or a quat plus, and Dave will be talking about that in more detail. We also have our information brochure available to download. This is an example of our updated clean, drain, dry signs. We have a whole bunch of these materials that we just did a large reprint of. So if anyone is interested in receiving outreach materials, I will just move to the next slide, which has our Whirling disease inbox. And this can be used for submitting requests for outreach materials. So this inbox here, you can contact us through that to request if you're interested in getting some information brochures. I mentioned yesterday that we're really looking to identify areas where signage is needed. So if you know of a location where signage is needed, then we do have aluminum signs available, and we would just need to work on what would be needed for the installation. But what I did want to touch on here is reporting. So if you observe or know of someone that has observed fish showing signs of Whirling disease, we ask that you actually don't remove or transport that fish. We want to minimize, as I just talked about in terms of best management practices, if that fish is potentially infected with Whirling disease, we want to minimize handling and movement of that fish. So we actually ask that instead you just take photos or a video and include as much information as you can, of course, location, and submit that to our inbox that's shown there. So, and then that allows us to then do necessary follow-up. And I will mention, I think it was touched on yesterday, but what things that we'll be looking into is, could there potentially be, for example, if it's as is shown in the fish here, if it has that crooked spine, sometimes that can be caused by other things. So they may actually just have a broken spine. And so that's where we connect in with our regional fisheries biologists. They may be aware of something happening in that system. Sometimes too, if there's extreme kind of changes in temperatures, that can sometimes lead to erratic sort of behavior of fish. So that's typically our first step, is we connect with our regional fisheries biologists, and they may know more information about what could alternatives might be causing some of those clinical signs, depending on what they are. And the next, I just wanted to briefly touch on, I spoke yesterday about our invasive mussel defense program. We also have a large number of resources available. I've got our program website listed there. If you have any questions or if you know of people that are bringing their boats from outside of BC and want to know more about the inspection stations, again, we have an inbox here. So our COS aquatic invasive species at gov.bc.ca inbox. This is how we receive notifications from other jurisdictions if there's boats destined for BC. We also really encourage the public, if you have questions about the inspection stations, you can report it through there. You can also report if you have any suspected sightings of invasive mussels. That can also be reported through our inbox as well. And it came up yesterday, so I actually just added this slide this morning, but I thought, and as a way to kind of end on a bit of a fun note, I thought I would just share that in BC, we do also have a canine program. So we do have an aquatic invasive species canine program. We've actually just had a few changes to our canine program. So we have our existing canine major and his handler sergeant, Denny Chrétien. They are based out of Cranbrook, and so they've been together for a number of years now, and Canine Major is actually now our more senior of the canines, because our former canine folks may have actually met or knew of Canine Kilo. He did actually retire last year, and he actually just received this year an honorable mention through our Premier's Award. So it was pretty neat to see his services get recognized that way. But we do have this photo, actually, I just received yesterday from Sergeant Dan Bartol, because he was doing his first shift with our new canine, Canine Georgia, who just finished getting her certifications. They were doing their first shift together at the Golden Inspection Station yesterday. So I thought I would, it's fresh, hot off. Everyone's seeing this for the first time, but I thought it was kind of a fun piece to share with the group that they were out yesterday. And this boat did not have any detections. And so I thought I would just share that they are incredibly valuable resources to the program, both, of course, for their detection abilities. So they are both trained to detect for invasive mussels, not trained at present for detecting for whirling disease, but they are cross-trained on some other sort of enforcement-related pieces, such as evidence recovery and search and rescue capabilities as well. Incredibly valuable tools in terms of their ability to detect, and of course, incredibly valuable outreach and education resource as well. So with that, I think that is where I will stop there. And I think I'm going to be passing it directly over to David to move us into the next portion. So I'll stop
Thanks,
sharing and over
Martina.
to you, David.
I stand corrected. I think it was me yesterday, actually, that said that I thought Alberta was the only.
Alberta certainly led the charge in terms of having their canine program before us in BC. So, but yeah, it's a great. We really enjoy having them as part of the program.
You guys obviously have some great canine support too.
Yeah.
So just bear with me here for a sec. Oh.
Great, Dave. We can see your slide, but we also still see a little window on the right. There we go. Looks good now.
Are we good?
Looks great.
Okay. Sec here. I'm still having a bit of a time with double monitors here, so sorry, folks. Get this set up here yet. Okay, back to the beginning. How's that? Good to go?
Yeah, still looks good.
Okay, perfect.
I see a decontamination slide.
Thank you, and thanks to Martina for giving us that overview of the Clean Drain Dry program. I'm going to do a deeper dive this morning into decontamination and give you some tools, as Martina mentioned, to use when you're out in the field. So to start us off, I had a mentor who used to say, when in doubt, spell it out when it came to effective presentation. So I thought I'd start with a definition of decontamination. I've highlighted a few keywords on this slide, which speak to our objective in decontaminating equipment potentially contaminated with M. cerebralis. But I do want to start with a caveat. All of the information I'm going to provide in my discussion is specific to whirling disease only. That is not other aquatic invasive species, although many of the general principles I'll discuss today do apply to aquatic invasive species more broadly. The devil really is in the details. Decontamination protocols, CT or contact times, and recommended chemical disinfectants are specific for M. cerebralis. Research is providing new information in this area all the time, and I expect that over time we'll hopefully have some new tools to deal with whirling disease in the future. As Martina mentioned, the BC government has its own decontamination protocol. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to use the principles from Alberta's, which, as Martina mentioned yesterday and again today, agree very strongly with BC's. And I'm going to discuss what I've learned from my research and others about what methods work to kill M. cerebralis. It's important to note that to be effective, decontamination procedures need to address the entire life cycle of M. cerebralis. That is all of its spore stages. And recall that we mentioned yesterday that there are some real challenges with disinfectants and decontamination because of that two-host life cycle. And maybe you remember from the life cycle information yesterday that myxospores, one of the spore stages of M. cerebralis, can remain viable in mud for up to 25 to 30 years, and it can survive freezing for several months. Document shown on the left is the latest version of Alberta's decon protocol. The document on the right is BC's protocol. You can find both on the web. And if you're planning on using either document as a field guide, just make sure you've got the latest and greatest version. By the way, while I was looking for some of this reference material to post on these slides, I did find another really good reference. And kudos to CKIS. They've got a great synopsis of decon procedures on their website as well. There's a number of objectives that any decontamination protocol should achieve, and I've summarized those here because I think they're really important to understand. They are: number one, decontamination protocols should use techniques that can be safely and efficiently administered in the field. Number two, decontamination protocols should not themselves harm the environment that they're being used in. Seems self-evident, but not so much. And number three, decontamination protocols should not have adverse effects on the equipment that they're being used on, such that the equipment has to be replaced more frequently, or worse yet, that the equipment fails in use as a result of the decon process. And last but not least, decontamination protocols should be economically feasible, both in the cost of the materials and in the labor costs to complete the decon work. Well, as Martina mentioned, clean, drain, dry, and pull the plug are really great best management practices and are always a good idea. However, they may not be enough in known or suspect whirling disease positive waters because spores are highly resilient. Big gun might be required to kill them. Also remember that the approach to decontamination is and should always be risk-based. Best management practices may be adequate in low-risk environments, but you'll likely need to get out the bigger guns in high-risk situations. Current research indicates that the methods currently effective against M. cerebralis include freezing at minus 20 degrees or colder for at least 7 days, temperatures at or above 90 degrees C, preferably over 100 degrees for at least 10 minutes. That's the contact time or CT value that we talk about. Or chemical disinfection using quaternary ammonium compounds, commonly called QACs, or chlorine bleach at appropriate concentrations and CT times. So if you have access to a blast freezer, as shown on the left in this slide, or steam unit, that's great. But that's not likely to be the case when you're working in the field or returning to the warehouse and need to decontaminate your gear, either streamside or before you put it back into storage for the next project. And what if you're headed back home from a day's fishing, or you've been out boating with the family? What to do with that kayak or stand-up paddleboard, PFDs, waders, or the fishing boat? In many cases, you may need to use a chemical disinfectant for decon purposes. So on a side note, Parks Canada used an innovative and probably very effective method to deal with the whirling disease outbreak when it was first discovered in Alberta in Johnson Lake, Banff National Park in 2016. So you won't find Johnson Lake on a map of Alberta anymore. And that's because Parks Canada drained it. So drain, clean, dry. Probably a good thing that Kootenay Lake isn't in a national park. The most commonly used chemicals for decontamination against whirling disease are, as I mentioned before, quaternary ammonium compounds or QACs. And there's a whole family of those that contain different active ingredients with different efficacies against whirling disease and chlorine bleach. I'm a strong advocate of using QACs and specifically one called Quat Plus, pictured here, and not chlorine bleach. And I'll tell you why. Remember, we discussed the key objectives of decontamination. Well, in my opinion, QACs went out over chlorine bleach on all points every time. QACs are broadly used in the medical industry for sterilizing hospitals, medical equipment, operating rooms, etc., etc. And there's good reasons why. They are and can be used safely in the field. They're far less toxic and require little to no personal protective equipment, at least as compared to chlorine bleach. They're less toxic to aquatic environments than chlorine bleach and are more easily disposed of safely when it comes to pouring them down the drain, for instance. They don't degrade equipment like chlorine bleach does either. The table with the orange banner was pulled from BC's 2024 fact sheet on whirling disease. It provides really good information about concentrations, CT times, cautions, and how to mix up a batch of chlorine bleach for whirling disease disinfection. But I'd like to add a bit of additional information because it doesn't include Quat Plus, or at least not how to mix up a solution. And we'll talk about that a little further. You will find those directions in Alberta's decon protocol and in other places on the web too. But essentially, Quat Plus is mixed up at a 1500 ppm concentration. However, another caveat, and I put a circle around one box on the concentration column. I don't agree with using only 1500 ppm when using Quat Plus for both wiping and spraying. Maybe a minor point, but research does suggest that the concentration should be doubled to 3000 ppm when wiping down non-submersible items, which shouldn't be sprayed either. So that is a small group of mostly electronic equipment. And there were some questions yesterday about things like YSI meters when doing water quality monitoring and how to deal with the probes, for instance. So this would be a case in point. And of course, the same 10-minute CT value applies. Equipment to be decontaminated needs to be cleaned of all visible mud or plant material first. And Martina emphasized that when she talked about clean, drain, dry. I used to tell folks when we were doing decon workshops that you can't disinfect dirt. And that came after watching people take a jug of quat and pour it onto some mud and thinking that maybe that constituted decon. Equipment should be as dry as possible as well, preferably having been cleaned off and hung in the sun to dry as completely as possible. The solution of choice, pun intended, is to then immerse the equipment in a 1500 ppm solution of Quat Plus. Gear can also be sprayed using a handheld pump-up type sprayer, illustrated in the picture on the right. If it can't be immersed or sprayed, like electronic equipment, as I mentioned, it can be wiped down with a clean cloth, soaked in a 3000 ppm solution of Quat Plus, and in all cases, gear needs to be kept wet, or at least moist, for 10 minutes. Equipment should be rinsed with clean water, not the water from the lake or stream you just pulled your kayak out of, and then allowed to dry, preferably in the sun for at least 24 hours. To be efficient and effective, the level of decontamination must match the relative risk of equipment potentially harboring M. cerebralis. Alberta developed the three-level approach that Martina mentioned again this morning, and we discussed earlier, shown on the top chart in blue, where a level 1 is a low-risk area and clean, drain, dry is probably adequate on site. Level 2 is a moderate to high-risk area, clean, drain, dry on site and a chemical decon on site or at a dedicated decon location is recommended. And level 3, very high risk, for instance, whirling disease positive areas where a level 1 and a level 2 and then chemical decontamination at a decontamination hub, at least in Alberta, is recommended. These levels, represented as white low risk, yellow moderate to high risk, and red whirling disease positive, were shown on the Alberta provincial decon map. Contractors doing work in Alberta are strongly advised to determine the risk zone they're working in before starting any work. BC's risk map is shown in the figure on the right, which is also included in BC's decon protocol. And as Martina emphasized, keep in mind that in BC, the Columbia River watershed is known to be whirling disease positive and has been declared an infected area by CFIA. The rest of BC is currently being declared a buffer area for the disease. And BC, like Alberta, has also implemented more rigorous decon protocols for the Columbia River watershed, which are very specifically described in BC's decontamination protocol as well. So, putting this into practice. This is Jay White, an expert limnologist and member of Alberta's Aquatic Invasive Species Task Force. And we worked with Jay to produce this little video that's available as a YouTube video. Gives us a good idea of how to put together a home decontamination kit. And by the way, this video was one of the most effective outreach tools we produce for whirling disease education. It's also produced under contract by a gentleman called Michael Short, the producer of Alberta's Let's Go Outdoors TV program. And Michael is a personal friend of mine and is retired in Sydney here in the island. And I talked to him last week. He might be in the audience today, I'm not sure. But Michael tells me he's keen to produce a Made in BC video. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah, YouTube video lead-ins. Maybe I can get rid of that. There we go.
Let's take a minute and learn how all of us recreational anglers can help prevent the spread of whirling disease. So there's two scenarios I'd like to walk you through today. If you're just fishing in one water course or water body, and you're able to clean, drain, and dry your equipment for 24 hours, preferably in the sunlight, that's going to be an adequate decontamination. However, if you're planning on traveling between water bodies, say you're moving from a lake to a stream to continue your fishing, what we're going to want to do is have a little more intensive disinfection so that you can make sure that your gear remains clean. We don't often think of how much mud or dirt can be associated with boots. Just a gram of mud could contain hundreds, if not thousands, of spores and even seeds for aquatic invasive species. And we don't want to be transporting that between sites. We want to make sure that we're physically knocking that mud off and making sure that we're not carrying that with us. So physically, we've walked through, we've knocked the dirt off of all the equipment as best that we can, got those chunks of mud out as best we can. Now, the disinfection isn't very onerous at all. What we recommend is a solution of Quat Plus, which is a quaternary ammonium. This should be easier on your equipment than just standard bleach. And we want a 2-liter amount of Quat into 62 liters of tap water. This bin is approximately 64 liters, so we're going to fill a Rubbermaid bin like this up almost to the top. That's going to be the disinfection bath. And for that gear that's possibly been exposed to whirling disease, what we're going to want to do is immerse it in a Quat disinfectant for 10 minutes. And for any of your larger gear that's not able to be submerged or it's not convenient to submerge it, what we can do is use a 1,500 part per million spray of Quat, and we can just spray those items down, allowing a 10-minute disinfection, a 10-minute period where it stays wet and in contact with the disinfection, and then allow that equipment to dry, just air dry, preferably in the sun, and that will allow for an adequate disinfection against whirling disease. So you may have heard a lot about felt-soled wading boots. They can harbor a lot of parasite because it's quite a media for them to grow on. These have been banned in the federal parks throughout Alberta because of the issue of them being able to carry whirling disease on that felt material. And we're urging recreational users to not use these in other parts in Alberta as well. So we've tried to make this disinfection protocol as easy as possible. All of the equipment that you see here can easily be purchased at most stores. These are Rubbermaid bins. These are fairly inexpensive. A handheld sprayer that you can get at any garden supply store, also very inexpensive. And the Quat itself, which you can find from several retailers around Alberta, also fairly inexpensive. I would imagine our whole solution here is going to cost the average person less than $50. So we're looking at a less than $50 for our approach and 10 minutes of your time.
So as Jay mentioned, the equipment is pretty easily available to build your home decon kit, probably at your local hardware store, as Jay mentioned. And the price might have gone up a little bit, but I suspect still probably around $50. And none of it is rocket science. All of it is pretty straightforward and pretty easy to use. So sometimes you need a different approach. The images in this slide, large excavator on the left, water bomber, several different types of rig or marsh mats, Bailey bridges, all of which are used to temporarily cross wet areas or streams, pose their own unique and pretty significant problems for decontamination. Martina talked a little bit about water bombers, which are a great vector for moving water potentially contaminated with whirling disease around the province. We struggled with this a bit in Alberta because obviously wildfires are a huge priority, and you're not going to ground a fleet of water bombers. But in working with the aerial tax, one of the things that they experimented with was disposable polypropylene bags. And that thinking can be expanded to other applications as well, where you can line something, put water in, and then you can use the chemical disinfectants, which would otherwise not be usable because of the really stringent aircraft um, legislation and requirements. So there are ways and means, but sometimes we need to get a little bit innovative and creative. And we're going to talk about some of those when we talk in the next section about mitigating risk. Rig mats are another problem because they often are made of wood and they get moved around all sorts of places. They get wet and they're exposed as well. And again, being creative. In Alberta, anyway, we have freezing temperatures. And so we've talked to contractors and they don't use the same rig mats from project to project until they've been left for a winter out in their storage yard and have been frozen to minus 20 degrees for more than 7 days. We'll talk about a few of those things and approaches a little bit more in a minute. Large construction equipment, like the excavator that we looked at before, and pictures on the left, can be decontaminated, but it does take a huge amount of time and effort. The decon technicians that work on these sorts of equipment in Alberta require about 2 man-days for each piece of equipment like this. That's usually 2 decon techs working for a full day with pry bars, picks, and shovels. Often they have to remove up to 200 kilograms of mud, rocks, and dirt before they can either soak or steam clean the excavator. Remember, you can't decontaminate dirt. In Alberta, these sorts of decons are usually pre-booked and are either done at streamside with a mobile decon unit or at one of the permanent decon units that I showed pictures of in Lethbridge or Edmonton. In the absence of permanent decon hubs, which is the case in BC, there are still practices that you can employ to reduce the risk from these sorts of equipment. And we'll talk about some of those in the next section when we talk about mitigating risk before you get your feet wet. Wakeboard and wake surf boats present a unique problem as well because their ballast bags can hold as much as 2,700 liters of water. Water which is drawn out of the lake into the ballast bags and is not entirely pumped back out again. So each time these boats are moved from one lake to another, they pose a risk for spreading whirling disease. And it's really difficult to decon one of these boats because of the elaborate plumbing on board. Not to mention the difficulty in obtaining permission from the owner to pump a quat solution into his $350,000 boat, which, in his mind anyway, is probably going to void the warranty. Point of fact, we've had conversations with some of the major boat manufacturers, both when I was in Alberta and more recently here in BC, and we're working on convincing them that these solutions do not void warranties. Anyway, more on that in a minute too. So what to do? Well, we'll come back to some of these types of equipment when we talk about some of the approaches that you can use in general terms, rather than just piece of equipment by piece of equipment. So I have talked about some of the procedures that can be used to decontaminate various types of equipment and some of the challenges that are posed by some types of equipment. We'll take some questions now. I think is the next part of the agenda. And then we'll talk about how to mitigate some of the risks that I've discussed when you're planning a project out in the field.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much to both of you. So yeah, as Dave said, our plan is to take a few questions right now and give you an opportunity to sneak out for a bio break if needed. Scheduling wise, we had planned to reconvene. I'm just pulling it up here because it's disappeared from my screen. We were going to reconvene at 10. So we've got just under 10, we've got 8 minutes or so to get through questions and a break. So I'm going to start throwing some questions your way. There was a question from Lana, which I think was addressed yesterday, but Martine, I don't know if you want to just touch on it again because there were quite a few people interested in the response. She's just asking about will there be boat decontamination stations set up in BC? So if you could maybe just summarize yesterday's conversation quickly, that'd be great.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Great question. So, yes, we are continuing to operate our watercraft inspection stations through the Invasive Mussel Defense Program. We have very similar operations in terms of where our inspection stations are located as we did from last year. We're just in the process of updating our website with the map for 2026, but we're going to be continuing to operate at our key border entry points along the Alberta border as well as along the southern Canada-US border. We have some stations that are already open now. For example, the Golden inspection station on Highway 1 and our Olson inspection station on Highway 3 are now operational, and we'll have additional stations and kind of levels of operations increasing in mid-May.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to combine a question here from Corey and Molly, both having to do with disinfectants. So deep dive into that a little bit. So Corey's asking, and I know this was spoken to a little bit yesterday too, is Virkon no longer a suitable disinfectant? And then in addition to that, Molly notes that Parks Canada has an infographic out right now that lists Fantastic and Pine Sol as effective chemicals for whirling disease contamination. So could you address both of those?
So I'll talk about or deal with the latter first. So Pine Sol, that's interesting. That's a new one to me, and I'm not aware of any published literature. Now, as I mentioned, there's always new and emerging science, and not all of that work has been published yet. In fact, there is a soon to be published paper coming out by a researcher in Alberta that's going to talk about some new analytical methods for whirling disease. So I'm not going to say categorically that Pine Sol isn't a good disinfectant, but my understanding of what's in Pine Sol would strongly suggest that it's not. Um,
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
I'm gonna.
and we did talk about Virkon a little bit yesterday, and as I mentioned, it's used extensively. I'm quite familiar with Virkon in the aquaculture and specifically in the hatchery business, and alongside some of the other iodine complexes like ovidine and wescodine and betadine, and there's a bunch of others, and Virkon falls into the same family. And I can say that Virkon does not have the same efficacy against whirling disease as QACs and chlorine. And sorry, I missed the other compound in with pine sol, Haley.
Let me just find it. Fantastic. It's like a
Oh.
household cleaner.
Yeah, and as far as I know, it doesn't have quaternary ammonia compounds in it or QACs, so I would put it in the same category as pine sol. Yeah, as I mentioned before, sorry to belabor the point, but the devil really is in the details. And there's a whole family of QACs, and even efficacy within that family of QACs is not the same. There is a table, I think it's an appendix in the Alberta Decon protocol that lists probably a dozen QACs, and you'll find that they have various concentrations of the effective compound, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the organic name that's 18 syllables long. So it really behooves people to read the labels to look for quaternary ammonium compounds unless you're choosing to use bleach.
Okay, thank you. Okay, another disinfectant question specific to whether Quat Plus is effective for zebra quagga mussel veligers. Is that how I say that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Villagers is the larval form. That's Martina's area of expertise, probably more than mine, of I think most of the invasive mussels. And I think QACs, I'm going to pass this over to Martina, but QACs are effective for deconning mussels and villagers from the publications that I've reviewed anyway. Martina?
Yeah. So yeah, for decontamination, so at our inspection stations for watercraft and even equipment, we're actually just using hot water. So, but of course, that is if you have access to being able to have the contact times. So for invasive mussels, the contact times and temperatures are different from whirling disease. So it is, and it varies depending on the types of the boats. For things like nets and equipment for disinfection, for example, if you're doing monitoring work, we recommend a combination of using bleach and vinegar. And so that's recommended for if you're using it for equipment. But generally, for us at our inspection stations, we're using the hot water because there isn't the need to bring in chemicals because the hot water is effective for boats and the equipment. But if you're using kind of field gear, we recommend using the combination of bleach and vinegar.
Okay, thank you. So we've got 2 minutes until 10. What do you want to do? Do you want to run through a couple more questions, then take 2 minutes for a bio break and start a couple minutes late? I'm just asking my David and Martina team here.
I'd be open for questions.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Let's keep going. If anybody does need to sneak out to the washroom, why don't you go do that and we'll just keep going. Okay, so we've got a combination, we've combined a few questions here into one. So there's some curiosity around the best way to decontaminate a boat on a trailer if you don't have a steamer. So you do not have a steamer. So do you spray throughout with Quat Plus? And to that, or adding to that, is there any advice on chemical decontamination for aluminum boats, since the BC guidelines note that quat can erode the aluminum?
And so back to Martina's earlier comments about clean, drain, dry. And really that is the foundation of all um, decontamination work. And remember my comment about things being, or decontamination methods should be based on risk. So you don't always have to chemically decon your equipment. That's recommended in areas where there's high risk. So you could just look at a clean, drain, dry. And Martina went through the details there. What's really important is emphasizing that you can't disinfect dirt. So it needs to be clean.
Mhm.
And that means, you get home, take the hose out, and if you haven't already washed it off at streamside, um, which is the best management practice to leave any of that mud that's potentially decontaminated and other things there. But
Mhm.
clean it off, and then you um, can let it dry in the sun for preferably 24 to 72 hours, and that could be adequate. If you're looking at that boat coming from suspect or whirling disease positive waters, then a chemical decon is required. And yeah, we did note that the use of quats on aluminum can cause degradation, but that's really a relative term. I decon my car topper, an aluminum car topper, almost all car toppers, or small fishing boats, the 10, 12, 14 footers are aluminum, or there's a lot of aluminum in them. And I've been doing that for 10 years now, and I've seen no sign of corrosion at all, but I am careful to rinse afterwards. So I think that's probably key. In terms of methodology, you can use one of those garden style pump up sprayers and mix up your 1500 ppm solution of quat And it doesn't take very long, actually, to go over the entire boat and then back again a couple of times to make sure that you're keeping all surfaces moist. Paying particular attention to the bunks on the trailer because a lot of the bunks with older boats anyway are wrapped with fabric, and that fabric is a really good place for contamination, mud and weeds and all that sort of stuff. And it tends to stay moist and or rot over time. So we're encouraging people to consider replacing that material with something that is at least synthetic. If it's natural fiber, or in some cases, people are putting puck board or other things onto their bunks in place of the old carpet that used to be used.
Okay. Okay, great. There's lots of questions that we're not going to get to, so maybe I'll just choose one more and apologize to everybody. And if there's time at the very end, we'll circle back to them. So this next question is seeking guidance for decontamination for road contractors doing bridge washing in the Columbia region. The contractor can only withdraw water from cleaning from specific licensed locations, and the water in the tank is used for several bridges. Decontamination between different bridges is generally not feasible. Are there additives or treatment methods that could be added to the tanks to help reduce the likelihood of whirling disease transmission?
Yeah, I bet you that's Renee that's asking that question. And that's a really good question. Given her role as an environmental monitor when I met her. Um, yeah, I don't, unless I'm missing something, and there was lots of context there. I'm not sure why you couldn't put quat or a quaternary ammonia compound into the tank. It does degrade, um, obviously in contact with organics, recognizing that you don't want to put large volumes of QACs into fish-bearing water. So I'd have to think about that a little bit more. I'll come back to that. And if it was Renee, we can have a chat afterwards.
Okay,
But
that's
really
great.
good question. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so we are 12, or sorry, we are 10:04. And we had hoped to start the next talk at, let me just see, 10 o'clock. So Dave, do you need to take a quick break before launching into your next slides?
Yeah, I'm pretty good actually. Have
Okay,
a
I'm going to
water
give you
here.
the
I'm good
green
to go.
light to Sally forth.
I'm sorry, Haley, was that a green light?
That was a green light to Sally forth. Yeah.
All right, moving on. So my intention with this section is to give you to pique your interest and give you some overarching principles, things that you can do before you get out into the field, um, before you get your feet wet, to minimize both the risk relative to all of the decon work that we've talked about, such that maybe you don't need to do that decon work at all, and make you maybe a little more efficient in terms of the time and resources that you need for planning some of these projects in the wet, particularly now that we're in this world of whirling disease positive watersheds. So I think we all know and can appreciate the wisdom of Benjamin Franklin when he said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I think some people commented on my fish puns yesterday, or in whirling disease vernacular, help stop the spin before you jump in. So as I mentioned, this topic is focused on providing some tools to those of you that are involved in work on, in, or close to water in BC. And I think that's probably most people online this morning, or elsewhere for that matter. So our target audience for this session is primarily aquatic consultants, project managers, and not-for-profit folks who directly deliver, support, or contract aquatic work. So you're planning some field work this spring, and you've just learned something about whirling disease, and you want to do your due diligence. So where to start? A couple of things you might consider before you get down to serious project planning, like review the life cycle and epidemiology of whirling disease and the decon protocols. Consider where you're going to be doing work and the level of risk, whether that's high, medium, or low, or just high and in an adjacent buffer zone in British Columbia. Based on current Government of British Columbia or CFIA risk mapping. And I'll emphasize current because hopefully we don't see further spread of whirling disease, but I'm not sure how realistic that actually is, despite our best efforts. And I'm sure that Martina and her team and the CFIA will be actively monitoring that work through ongoing surveillance, some of which Martina's talked about already. So they will very likely be producing new and updated whirling disease maps. And think about possible vectors for disease spread. All of those things that we've talked about, mud, water, infected fish, infected equipment, watercraft, based on your project location and planned activities. One of the ways to deal with some of the initial decisions that I used with my team was to create a flowchart, much like the dichotomous keys used to key out species in identification guides. I provided a really, really oversimplified key, emphasizing so it's not correct, which was generated by AI on this slide. You know what they say about AI. It suffers from digital confidence and boldly goes where no fact has gone before. Involving field staff and managers in the development of a flowchart for your own organization can be a great team building activity and educational exercise too. Martina discussed BMPs, which are strategic recommendations to prevent the spread of M. cerebralis and include general advice like clean, drain, dry, and avoiding the transfer of mud between water bodies. They're typically broad in scope and somewhat flexible or adaptable to different situations. So an example of a BMP would be disinfect all wading gear. Standard operating procedures, or SOPs, on the other hand, are step-by-step instructions compiled by an organization to help staff carry out complex operations. They aim to improve efficiency, reduce risk, and reduce miscommunication, and maintain an established quality and sometimes quantity standard for an organization. To be useful, they should be specific and task-oriented, followed exactly, and provide the details required to perform the task in exactly the same way each time, no matter the person doing it. The BMP example of disinfecting all wading gear would be identified in an SOP as soak neoprene chest waders in a 1500 ppm solution of Quat Plus for 10 minutes, rinse with clean water, and hang to dry for at least 24 hours. Every company, in my opinion, working in or around the water in BC should have at least the following SOPs for whirling disease. Decontamination protocols for all types of project gear, big and small. Gear selection and equipment storage requirements. Equipment staging. Sample handling and transport. Water discharge management and related documentation requirements. I've included an example of an SOP for decontamination from an aquatics consulting company called Equality. And actually, Jay, who narrated the decon video that we saw, was the president of Equality. Equality pioneered some of the early decon efforts in Alberta. Their decon SOP is about 3 pages long. Jay's kindly made it available. It's on the internet, which makes extensive use of existing government information. Why reinvent the wheel? And includes a form to log equipment decontamination for quality assurance purposes. In planning any field operation, there are a number of important decisions required. These include equipment selection, identifying key staff and their responsibilities on the project, and selecting staging areas for both mobilization and demob, to name a few. These get more complicated when considering whirling disease. Equipment selection priority. On equipment selection, priority should be given to selecting non-porous materials which can be decontaminated. Remember that everything that goes into the field should be decontaminated for the relevant risk level before it's put back into storage. We've talked about deconning equipment a lot already, but suffice to say that best management practice is to decon at stream side according to your previously defined level of risk and, of course, your SOP. Recognizing that some equipment may need to go through a second or third level decon once you're back at the warehouse. It's really, really important to ensure that you've set up clean and dirty zones at your equipment warehouse too, so that cross-contamination doesn't occur in the warehouse. And remember, what goes out in the field comes back from the field. You can spend a lot of time after you get home washing dishes, so to speak, if you're not judicious about your gear selection. Work areas in the field should be designated as clean versus dirty zones as well, for purposes of all project activities. That includes crew trucks as well. Where possible, vehicles and gear should not be used in both clean and dirty zones, as it will need to be deconned each time. Instead, consider assigning specific equipment and people or resources to dirty zones and clean zones separately, and develop a project plan such that they do not need to cross over between zones. Stage project activities in the field on the principle that water flows downstream, and so should your work activities. For example, when collecting water samples, start at the most upstream site and work your way downstream. This reduces the risk of transporting whirling disease into clean headwater streams within a watershed. And of course, recognizing that for some water sampling and other in-stream activities, this won't be possible because of the collection protocol, but it's an overarching principle to consider. And even sometimes buying a second piece of equipment so that you don't have to spend all that time on decon can actually be cost effective. And that would apply to things like potentially a YSI DO monitor. But remember that you'll need an SOP that is stringently adhered to if you're going to keep contaminated gear in your warehouse and not decon it each time. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service company I know of uses this approach. And a color coding system, which is rigidly monitored to visually tag gear as red, not deconned, and green as deconned when equipment leaves a wildfire base. If you're involved in contracting work, there are a few things you can do to reduce the risk of your contractor spreading whirling disease on your behalf, so to speak, and to protect yourself legally also should that occur. Consider including clauses in the contract between you and your contractor, which define your organization's decontamination requirements as a deliverable, so that you can hold your contractor accountable for completing appropriate decon before, during, and after your project. This is particularly important now. Large contractors are increasingly bidding on projects that require large equipment, like the excavator pictured here. This equipment's being moved between provinces as general contractors get work. And as you now know, these machines can harbor whirling disease in the hundreds of kilograms of mud that they routinely carry, both on the machine and often on the lowboy trailer that's transporting them. And of interest, do they currently need to stop at watercraft inspections when coming into BC? Unfortunately, we all know the answer to that question. Even though one excavator that's been working in stream in a whirling disease positive watercourse poses a much higher risk to the aquatic environment than a kayak or stand-up paddleboard. Hence the need to be diligent with your contractors. Including the appropriate clauses in your contracts gives you the legal right to ask where that equipment is coming from, inspect it on arrival to your job site, and ensure the operator is following your decon SOP. As Martina mentioned, the BC government has already incorporated these sorts of clauses, as shown on the left, into their contracts for work in the Columbia River Basin, and notably, like Alberta, as a condition on any fisheries collection or research permits issued by the province as well. I've included a clause as an example here from one of my old Alberta government contracts. If you're not already doing this, it's something you should seriously consider, as it not only prevents the spread of whirling disease, or helps prevent the spreading of whirling disease, but potentially protects you and your organization from legal liability for the introduction of whirling disease into a new watershed. Developing your own SOPs is a great step, but it's only part of a good whirling disease prevention and management program. There are a few other things to consider if you expect your SOPs to be effective and to be used by staff in the field. Research dictates that there's an inverse relationship between the risk of a disease outbreak, this little graph, the left y-axis, and the relative understanding of staff about biosecurity SOPs on the right y-axis. On this graph, risk of whirling disease outbreak is shown on the red line and staff understanding of SOPs on the blue line. As the relative understanding increases, the probability of a disease outbreak decreases, and both factors are positively affected by an increasing budget for training and audits on the x-axis, none of which is probably really a surprise. All of which confirms that you should also consider things like budgeting for biosecurity. Make sure you factor additional time and materials for decon into project costs, and provide a charge code for staff involved in decon work. Staff competency. Consider implementing a certification or gate check type training program for staff and contractors to be sure they understand and are familiar with SOPs. And last but not least, auditing. Schedule the occasional surprise field audits to ensure SOP adherence and let your contractors know that you're serious about stopping the whirl. So I think that provides all of the information I wanted to in this section. And I think we're going to end with a look to the future and a discussion about prevention strategies and the strategic outlook for whirling disease in BC. Haley, are we going to move right into the last section?
Okay, I thought that Martina was taking over right now. Is that not the case?
I think she is.
I think, David, you had the presentation for our last section, I
I
believe.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you
I
just
think
need
we're
to
going to
pull
be
it up.
jointly. Yeah, we're going to tag team the last presentation.
Looks great.
How are we doing? Can you see the slides?
I can, yeah, it looks great.
All right, cool. So we're going to end our presentation this morning, hopefully on a positive note, with a look forward at the strategic outlook for whirling disease management in BC. Martina and I are going to tag team this discussion. A quote to get us started. Goethe was once quoted as saying, "Knowledge is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do." Now, remember our education model. We're moving from knowledge to action this morning. Remember that having the parasite does not necessarily mean that environmental conditions are necessarily suitable for the outbreak of disease. Some states, such as Idaho and Washington, for example, have had positive detections of the parasite in their watersheds for many years, but have never seen major impacts to their rainbow trout populations. Meanwhile, Colorado, Montana, and now Alberta, as you've clearly seen, have the environmental conditions necessary for a whirling disease outbreak and coincident major declines in some trout populations. So, what do we know now? Well, we have a good understanding of the life history and epidemiology of whirling disease, and now hopefully you do too. And we know the current distribution of whirling disease in BC. My inside voice, or do we? I hope we do. And as you know, eradication of whirling disease from aquatic ecosystems is considered, pardon me, is considered impossible. The path forward requires the immediate and consistent application of the prevention strategies we've already discussed. Those include using best management practices like clean, drain, dry, and the development of risk-based SOPs to guide specific activities in whirling disease positive environments, stringent application of the appropriate risk-based decontamination protocols, and adherence to provincial legislation like pull the plug and in Alberta, keep wheels out of water. And being mindful of the education process I described earlier, we all need to take action. That includes doing things like making informed choices when you're purchasing equipment that will be used in or close to BC's waterways. For example, like choosing non-felt soled waders or using synthetic materials that can be decontaminated or replacing natural materials like existing lines on your boat with ones that can be deconned effectively, and creating your own personal decontamination kit. And I think Martina's up.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so I think as already been described a little bit yesterday, just circling back to some of the approaches that we've been taking here in BC and really looking to learn a lot from Alberta and other jurisdictions that have been responding and dealing with whirling disease for longer than us here in BC. So it's great that a lot of the resources from Alberta are being shared in the chat, because we are really building off of all the work that's been done in the other jurisdictions. And a big kudos and thank you to Dave and the work of all of the government of Alberta, because that's really been foundational for us to be able to build from. And so there's sort of, I would say, our efforts have been focused, as mentioned yesterday, on prevention and outreach. And with prevention is sort of from a pathway and containment perspective. So we've talked about the mandatory watercraft inspection stations and the information that's being shared at those inspection stations, checking that boats are leaving stations clean, drain, dry. That's for every boat. The goal leaving an inspection station is that that boat is clean, drain, dry. It's while they're focused principally on invasive mussels, providing additional information about other aquatic invasive species, including whirling disease. We have the pull the plug requirement, as been mentioned earlier this morning. I mentioned that we also here in BC, it's prohibited to move live fish. The use of live bait is also prohibited. So, measures to be aware of in terms of, linking back to some of the best management practices around not moving fish or fish parts. And we've already talked quite a bit about, of course, the decontamination requirement within the Columbia River watershed. So that being a requirement for government staff, contractors, and has been mentioned, is part of a requirement for any permits for work in and around water within the Columbia River watershed. Yesterday, I touched on the surveillance monitoring work that's that has been happening here in BC. And so that work has really been a collection of a lot of partnerships. And as mentioned also too, building off of work happening through both Parks Canada and in Alberta. So again, really benefiting from learning about, as Dave mentioned yesterday, and I spoke about, as we're looking at different tools that can help in those surveillance efforts, those are continuing to evolve. So Dave's been doing a great job of providing quotes throughout. I have to say I haven't been nearly, but I'm not sure that it's a quote, but one of my firm kind of beliefs is that the more tools we can have in the toolbox is a huge benefit in terms of, broadening what is available to us. And, the intent here today is to hopefully help, and yesterday is to help build more tools in the toolbox, and also collectively working together to see what else we can do to expand what those tools are. And we're going to touch on, and Dave's going to touch on it in the next few slides around, how research is also trying to help, build out more tools. And of course, foundational to this, and I love that Dave started yesterday off with the importance of education. We know that that's foundational to all of this, is building the awareness of what those tools are, and how we can work collectively to try to mitigate risk. And so that's, of course, having that consistent and common messaging of things like clean, drain, dry, and pull the plug is really important, because then we're all, practicing and sharing the same messaging across jurisdictions. And that is really beneficial in terms of knowing that, we're sharing that same message, and being able to see, of course, the intent is to always help to be able to shift awareness into action. And we've talked about that a fair amount already today. And so how can we help to provide tools and break barriers for enabling, changing behavior to build in these key, whether it's clean, drain, dry steps, the different best management practices that have just been talked about. So really, and, we're going to be shifting to having some breakout groups for the opportunity to kind of brainstorm about how, what are mechanisms to help, support and build that. So certainly prevention, monitoring, and education has really been, I would say, central to kind of strategy so far, and continuing moving forward. And maybe Dave, just over to the next slide. And we've touched on it already a number of times, but really partnerships is foundational to all of this work. And so that's certainly been a key component to date. Lots of ongoing collaborations, continuing to work closely with First Nations partners in the Columbia River watershed, opportunities to expand, those partnerships, continuing our coordination in terms of through those discussions on what are the shared prevention and monitoring objectives. So looking forward, what does that look like in terms of what are we hoping to achieve with monitoring moving forward, and how does that guide what our prevention efforts are? So really trying to look a bit more strategically at what are the goals of monitoring, and how that can help inform what our prevention strategies are. And also, of course, continuing the collaborations with both Government of Alberta, so Parks Canada, CFIA, Government of Alberta, and the University of Alberta. Really lots of interesting and great research that's continuing to happen that I know David's going to touch on a little bit in the next few slides. And as I've just said, we have lots of great lessons learned that, Dave spoke yesterday about kind of the showcasing the, kind of case study from Alberta. And in BC, we've really benefited from all the great materials that have been produced. So we really don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we want to just build off of that good work and the research, and how we can kind of continue to collectively work together in terms of how we can strengthen what tools we have, and understand what tools may be of benefit in the future. So I think that might be a good segue to pass it back to Dave, because I think he's going to talk about some of the kind of emerging research that's happening.
Thanks, Martina. There are some new tools being developed as well to help with early detection of Whirling disease and to identify the different lineages of the tubifex worms. Research has found that some types of tubifex worms, i.e. so-called different lineages, produce far more TAMs than others. And it's important to understand why that is if we're going to effectively manage the disease. So research is ongoing. Researchers are using environmental DNA, or eDNA, which both Martina and I talked a little bit about yesterday, to detect the parasite in water and sediment samples. eDNA helps us identify where Whirling disease might be detected by detecting the presence of the parasite's DNA. The parasites detected, then further lethal fish sampling is typically conducted. So it doesn't require as much lethal sampling or as many fish for lab analysis now, but eDNA is still a work in progress and is currently being used mostly as a predictive qualitative rather than quantitative tool. And a process called metabar coding, which I'm not going to do a deep dive into because I'm not a geneticist, which looks at DNA as well, is helping us identify the different lineages of tubifex worms, which helps map the geographic range of the disease without killing as many fish as well. There's also some groundbreaking modeling work being done at the University of Calgary and the University of Alberta as well. Using AI, researchers have developed a model called the hidden Markov model, which can predict the potential for Whirling disease using minimal environmental data, utilizing variables like water temperature and river flow. The model essentially fills in the gaps where actual fish testing information is unavailable. It's achieved an amazing 91% accuracy in predicting the disease outbreak in the Oldman River Basin in Alberta. And when trained on just one confirmed case, reached a roughly 70% accuracy in predicting the disease in another watershed in Alberta. So it has huge potential down the road. There was a question yesterday about hybridization, I think, and genetic research on developing resistant strains of fish. So thanks for that question, because understanding genetic resistance in some fish populations and utilizing genes from resistant strains of trout has also shown some promise in the United States. Reintroduction of the German Hofer strain of rainbow trout, which evolved with Whirling disease in Europe over many, many, many generations. Through hybridization with rainbow trout in Colorado, has significantly increased survival in the wild. Approximately 80% of Columbia river fry are now genetically engineered German Hofer hybrids. Yep, GMO fish, resulting in significantly reduced myxospore burdens and increased survival in Colorado River rainbow trout. Resistant strain reintroduction shows promise for use in other trout populations and other jurisdictions as well. But not everyone is on board with this one because of the whole GMO discussion, which is not part of what I'm going to talk about today. In conclusion, tools like AI-based monitoring, metabar coding to help us understand how climate change will shift the parasite's thermal infection window, and the reintroduction of genetically resistant strains gives us hope for the successful management of Whirling disease in the future. But successful management includes preventing the spread of the disease. which can only be accomplished through the prevention strategies that Martina mentioned earlier. Stopping at watercraft inspections, pulling the plug, and adhering rigorously to decontamination requirements, particularly in the Columbia River Basin. So in closing, I have a few remarks. This is my reminder to you that we all have a shared responsibility, a stewardship responsibility to protect BC's natural resources for future generations. Governments can't do it all alone. And I have some thanks to make. Thank you to everybody for your gifted time and attention these past 2 mornings to share some information and expand your awareness and understanding of whirling disease. I'd also like to personally thank the Columbia Mountains Institute and their partners for their concern about the Kootenays being ground zero for whirling disease in BC and for taking action through the delivery of this webinar. And I'd also like to thank my co-presenter, Martina Beck, for sharing the work her and her colleagues are doing in their war against whirling disease as well. Thanks for all that you do. And it was a pleasure working with you. I hope both Martina and I have piqued your interest and has sufficiently motivated you to take action. What small step are you going to take to keep fish in our future? Thanks. Back to you, I think, Haley.
That's great. Yeah. Martina, did you have anything you wanted to add before we moved into some questions?
I will just absolutely echo Dave's comments there. Really appreciate this opportunity. I hope it's been informative, and also want to really acknowledge and thank the Columbia Mountain Institute for hosting this and inviting me to present, and of course to David, my co-presenter. It's been great to be able to share this delivering of information, and as he said, hopefully it's piqued interest, and looking forward to the discussions that are coming in the final portion.
Okay, that is wonderful. Okay, everyone. So I think you know the drill. We are going to move into a Q&A. You've been adding great questions to the chat. We're moving those questions into another space, and then I'm relaying them to Martina and David. So we're going to move into that, and we'll do that. We've got a decent amount of time actually, and then by 11 o'clock we're going to move into some breakout rooms, and have a nice conversation. So I'll just start with the questions. So there's a question from Lana and a couple other folks who are just a little bit confused about the difference between boat inspection versus public decon stations. Could you illuminate that a little bit for us?
Yeah, happy to. And it's a great question. I saw it in the chat, but I was hoping to probably just be able to talk about it here. So in terms of the watercraft inspection stations, so those are, as it's been noted, it's required to stop if you're transporting your boat in BC and you pass an open inspection station. It's a requirement to stop. And those are focused principally for looking for invasive mussels. That being said, the goal with every inspection is for the boat to be leaving clean, drain, dry. The target for decontamination there is for invasive mussels. Of course, it's still going to help mitigate risk for whirling disease, but when Dave was referencing sort of public decontamination hubs, so we don't have any of those set up in BC specific for whirling disease. He did speak to ones that are were set up in Alberta for that. However, decontamination for whirling disease that's being recommended in the Columbia River watershed does differ from the decontaminations being done at the inspection station. So that's where we're encouraging to follow the decontamination protocol that's been described. So principally using that quat-based product for whirling disease, but still required to stop at an inspection station, particularly and it applies whether you're just moving your boat within BC or coming in from outside of BC. So again, but the decontamination for whirling disease is using that specific protocol that's been referenced.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, question from Kathy. There's some concerns about introducing quat into wetlands, particularly particularly in lentic systems with minimal flow and could be harmful to aquatic life. Do you have any thoughts on using quat? Any thoughts on if quat is a greater concern in lentic systems or not?
Yeah, great question. Maybe this is sort of that careful what you wish for as we're promoting the use of Quat Plus and other chemical disinfectants against whirling disease. We certainly need to be cognizant of its impact on the aquatic environment. Now, recall the criteria that I went over for determining an effective disinfectant. And I did mention that Quat Plus is more innocuous, it's a relative term, than chlorine bleach, which is one of the reasons that I'm recommending or a strong advocate of Quat Plus. It does break down in aquatic ecosystems extremely quickly. And so in the small concentrations that I would expect are going to be introduced, even into lentic environments where we have standing water and little turnover, um, I don't I don't think that it's going to pose a risk to aquatic life in general.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, David. All right. A question from Kalish, potentially more for Martina. Is BC government considering keep wheels out of water law, such as an image she saw from Alberta?
Yeah, and maybe I'll actually just it's not something that we've looked into here in BC. Maybe Dave, if you could just explain that a little bit more. It's not something that we've considered yet here in BC.
Yeah, I think I've got my audio on.
Mhm.
It emerged, keep wheels out of water emerged, morphed from earlier messaging about the impacts that four-wheel drive and quad use in the backcountry was having on pristine trout streams in the headwaters of many of Alberta's East Slopes cutthroat and bull trout systems, both of which are listed species. And the concern, of course, was that incubating trout eggs in shallow gravels in those environments are invisible. And quadders and ATV, four-wheel drivers, were ignorant in the truest sense of the fact that they were literally killing thousands and thousands and thousands of incubating trout eggs with their recreational activities. So, following that campaign, which was the birth of Keep Wheels Out of the Water, whirling disease came along and brought with it all of the problems related to transporting contaminated mud as a vector. So we went back to the four-wheel drive and ATV community and further explained with new messaging how much more damage the activities they were involved in actually posed. And we did a lot of public consultation, and in fact, we had very little resistance from the ATV and four-wheel drive communities. In fact, we started to receive invitations from the clubs around Alberta to give presentations about the effects of their activities on whirling disease. So we've had huge support through that partnership, and I would really encourage and advocate for taking the message about whirling disease in addition to the earlier one I mentioned to four-wheel drive clubs in British Columbia. It's a lot of work, but it paid huge dividends, and we ended up with a lot of advocates on our behalf. In fact, digress, but short story, we were sent photos in one situation from somebody who witnessed in the same four-wheel drive club who witnessed a bunch of his colleagues driving four-wheel drives through what turned out to be a bunch of bull trout reds and we got license plates thanks to him, and we were able to prosecute under a number of different pieces of legislation, and the fines were significant. So the program works.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, David. Okay, Ben has a question, and he's saying, how should the parts of a kayak that aren't accessible, like underneath a seat, in the stern, for example, and perhaps in the bow, sorry, in the front where the foot blocks are, how should those areas be disinfected?
Do you want to take that one, Martina, or I'm happy to?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. Um, Yeah, this is no different than the problems that I alluded to with wake surf boats. In fact, it's easier and simpler with a kayak than it is with all of the plumbing that comes with wake surf and wakeboard boats. So what I've done is to take the quat solution that I mentioned, and you can tilt a kayak into various orientations, and you can get quat plus into a lot of places in solution form. And I just swirl it around, dump it around with an effort to keep all surfaces moist for that 10-minute contact time. That's really, really important. And you can stick the nozzle, the spray end of a pump up sprayer into those drain holes and get get solution into all sorts of places that way. And then in Jay's home decon kit demonstration, you noticed one of those little 1 liter type squirt, one of these kind of dishwasher type squirt bottles. And those really, really help too. So.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Dave. Okay, so this segues well in my brain because I'm now thinking about my kayak trip coming up on the coast, and we have a question from Jamie and Adam about whether whirling disease can thrive in marine and brackish environments.
Woohoo! I was waiting for that question. Um, Thanks for asking it. So we talked a whole lot about the tube effects life cycle, and part of that was so that I hoped people could think about the question that was just asked. So for whirling disease to complete, for the parasite to complete its life cycle, and for whirling disease to be present, the spore or spore forms and tubifex worms has to be present. So I would pitch the question back to the questioner about whether he thinks freshwater tubifex sludge worms survive in marine environments. And of course, the answer to that question is no.
Mm,
So whirling disease can't complete, or the parasite that causes whirling disease can't complete its life cycle in marine environments. But does that mean that we don't have a problem? Well, in fact, we do, because I talked at some length about symptoms and mentioned asymptomatic carriers on a number of occasions. So here's the problem. So you take a whirling disease resistant Pacific salmon species like coho or chum or pink salmon that's an asymptomatic carrier. And it comes back to its natal stream to spawn, dies, and decomposes. And what do you think it releases into the benthos? Yep, myxospores, which are then transformed into TAMs through the tubifex worm that's present in that freshwater ecosystem that then infects, yeah, guess what? Sac fry and young of the year juvenile salmon. So whirling disease is a threat to predominantly freshwater ecosystems, but marine species secondarily.
mm. Okay. Okay, good answer. Thank you. All right, we've got a question about the recommendation to rinse equipment with fresh water after decon, but a note that this can often be quite hard in the field. How necessary is this step?
Yeah, for sure. Um, this question's come up repeatedly, and again, comes down to being practical and realistic versus technically correct. So I did emphasize with freshwater, thinking that somebody's going to ask the question about whether or not that meant they had to pack 20 and 30 or 40-liter carboys of fresh water out in the field to do their streamside decon. Yeah, in a perfect world. But yeah, in reality, no. So um, it's a flag on the play to do the best you can using clean water for your rinse. And if that needs to come from the stream somewhere, or if it means upstream's better from main tributary rather than main stem, yada, 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 or if it means not rinsing with fresh water till you get back home, and then you can rinse off the Quat Plus that you used when you're home from the garden hose. That's okay.
Okay, thank you. A few people might have exhaled just now. So, Lori's asking an interesting question, maybe more for Martina. Is there, but not necessarily, do you know if there's any legal liability related to the introduction of whirling disease? I guess specifically in BC, but
Yeah, so there isn't in terms of, if there's unintentional introduction of whirling disease into a system, there's no legal liability. So, for example, in BC, it's prohibited to possess, breed, transport, release zebra and quagga mussels in the province. Where that I'm not familiar, and maybe David, you may know if any other jurisdictions have that specific kind of link from a whirling disease perspective. I think where that could be challenging to enforce is recognizing that it is a parasite in a microscopic form that can be present, in a way that couldn't be visibly seen. And so in terms of knowing how that could be kind of transmitted, it'd be very difficult to be able to pin that it is in fact there. So that's just where we have other measures. For example, what we've talked about, pull the plug being a requirement. It's illegal to move live fish, which are mechanisms in which it could be transported, but tied specifically to transport of whirling disease because of that complexity of the life cycle. It would be challenging to enforce. I'm not aware of other jurisdictions that have that, but David, maybe you are.
Sure. I hesitate to offer legal opinion always, and I don't know, I think there's at least one lawyer looking at the names signed on, so it'll be interesting to see what the comments are in the chat after my comments. But there is legislation in Alberta, and there's federal legislation as well. And I'm talking about the Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act in Alberta, the EPEA, the Provincial Fisheries Act, and the federal Fisheries Act that DFO owns and regulates that talk about the introduction of deleterious material. And currently, the definition of that, as enforced by DFO and federal fisheries officers, relates primarily to the obvious sorts of things like sediment and mud and other anthropogenic compounds. But I'm aware from discussions when I was leaving Alberta before I retired with our legal team about the definition of deleterious material. And there's some thinking that it might extend as far as aquatic invasive species and viruses and bacteria and other pathogens, which obviously includes whirling disease as well. So currently, I think there are legal people exploring that definition of deleterious material, but that's as far as I know it goes currently.
okay. Okay, I'm going to say two questions left, and then we're going to pass it off to some new folks. So we've got a question here about how large the concern is for gear that isn't actually getting wet. So, for example, a backpack set down on the ground beside the stream, dirt on a tire tread, that sort of thing. It seems like best practice would be to decontaminate, but how prevalent are spores if you as you get farther away from the stream?
Okay. Yeah, really good question because obviously it impacts your efforts to decon in the field and in other places. So um, often, so thinking through this, if you use launching a boat as an example, so you're pulling that trailer or recovering a boat. So you're pulling that boat and that trailer back out of the water. And in a lot of places, that means that there's a lot of mud and potentially a lot of sediment on the wheels of the boat trailer, and that is a significant risk if you're in whirling disease positive environment. And again, using an Alberta example, that would mean that that equipment needs to go back to a permanent decon hub where all of that mud that's left is steam cleaned off and the trailer's deconned extensively that way. So again, it comes back to risk. So if you're in a freshwater, if you're in a marine environment, no cause for concern, or very little anyway. If you're in a freshwater environment, then I think you need to strongly consider the risk. Are you in a buffer zone or are you in the Kootenays? And if you're in a whirling disease positive environment, then I think it is necessary to take all of the steps that we talked about to decon the wheels and remove as much mud, which is a known vector, from your equipment as possible.
Okay, great. Last question. Has there been any study about the possibility of transmission of whirling disease spores by other species of fish? So there's just the spores, I think. So for example, carp bass or various minnow species.
No, as I mentioned a couple of times, the literature all confirms to date anyway that whirling disease is only a disease of salmonids.
Okay, yep, this is what we thought. Okay, thank you very much, Dave. Thank you, Martina. Our next segment of the agenda is going to be hosted by the Central Kootenay Invasive Species Society and the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society. So I'd like to welcome and introduce Molly Tilden and Jess Booth. Molly, you can go ahead and take over screen share as you like while I read out your bio. So Molly is the development supervisor with the Central Kootenay Invasive Species Society, or CICUS, who lives in Salmo, BC. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology from the University of Fraser Valley and a professional background in invasive species management and biodiversity conservation in BC. Outside her work, she's a whitewater kayaker and a passionate and is passionate about protecting freshwater ecosystems and the health of our waterways. So we also are going to have Jess Booth with us, and Jess is the Communications and Engagement Manager with the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society. Jess holds a Bachelor of Outdoor Education and in Natural Resource Education from La Trobe University. And she's passionate about fostering meaningful connections between people and the land. Through her work, she collaborates with local governments, First Nations communities, industrial industry professionals, and environmental organizations to support responsible recreation and protecting biodiversity. So I'm going to pass it over to you, ladies.
Good morning. Thank you for the intro, Haley. I am Jess, and I am the Communications and Engagement Manager here with CSIS, or the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society. We would really like to thank CMI for hosting this and for Dave and Martina for their presentations over the last 2 mornings. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else has too. We'd also really like to acknowledge that we received financial support over 2025 from the Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program, and that was to help with looking into some whirling disease prevention and monitoring, and a project that we did last year.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Molly. I work with the Central Kootenai Invasive Species Society. And just to explain a bit who we are, CKIS is a nonprofit society. We formed back in 2005. Our working area includes the regional district of the Central Kootenai and the Kootenai boundary areas A and B. We work with a very broad group of partners and funders throughout our region. And it's our vision at CKIS that ecosystems, communities, and the regional economy are healthier because the harmful impacts and spread of invasive species have been reduced.
Great, and this is CSIS. So we are a really similar organization to CKIS. We're a registered charitable nonprofit and a regional invasive species organization working within the region displayed on the map there, so the Columbia Shoe Shop Regional District. And so similarly, we are an organization or a network of partners who collaborate to prevent, reduce, and manage invasive species, primarily through education, engagement, and coordinated action. Our vision is for the environment, economy, and society of our region to be stewarded from the adverse impacts of invasive species. And we have a field program which encompasses terrestrial invasive species. We do inventory, treatment, and monitoring. And also we have an aquatics program. So that is primarily sampling for zebra and quagga mussels. And then, of course, the communications and engagement, which is what we're doing today.
And to provide some bigger context, so this map is showing our network of regional invasive species organizations, also known as RESOs, across BC. So CKIS and CSIS are just 2 of 16 different groups throughout the province. And RESOs are all nonprofits, and they coordinate invasive species management at the regional level. So our work involves invasive species monitoring, mapping, control, and public education primarily. We work closely with the province to ensure it's coordinated and effective management, but we also tailor our work to our specific regional ecosystems and priorities. So CSIS and CKIS have been working together on whirling disease outreach because our service areas span the Columbia River Basin. So this is also the whirling disease infected area in BC. And so whirling disease prevention in our regions is really critical to prevent further spread into other parts of the province. But if you're from outside of our areas, whirling disease prevention, as we all know now, is still very important. And we would be happy to help connect you with your local regional invasive species organization for more support.
So some of those organizations are members on the call. I've seen their names pop up, but for what we've done in 2025, CKIS and EKIS, we delivered 2 targeted surveys. One was for the general public and one for industry partners. That was to assess a baseline of whirling disease to determine how much the public already knew and also industry, and what support people were looking for in terms of additional prevention and education measures. We held meetings with a broad range of partners, including First Nations, provincial contacts, lots of other environmental organizations, to coordinate prevention efforts of whirling disease across our region. Within that, we delivered a targeted outreach programs like Clean, Drain, Dry, and talked about decontamination, focusing on some high-risk groups that we've talked about a lot over the last couple of days, such as boaters, anglers, and tourism operators. We also did workshops, events, and digital outreach to increase regional awareness, and looking for other groups requiring further training and support within our region.
So through those surveys and also just in-person interactions that we had last year, we gathered some really important information about whirling disease. Kind of one of the main outcomes was that the awareness of whirling disease in our regions ranges from low to moderate. Many water users were aware of some of the prevention practices such as clean, drain, dry, but then there was a lot of lack of clarity around what types of water users needed to be doing those practices as well as how to do those practices for specific types of gear. And then decontamination protocols was also a bit of a gap in knowledge. We did hear from both the public and industry partners that they strongly supported greater whirling disease education opportunities, preferably in person. They also supported infrastructure at boat launches to make decontamination easier, and regional prevention planning was supported. In-person decontamination demonstrations and targeted outreach with specific groups were both identified as priorities. There was also strong interest among several First Nations for collaboration and co-developed approaches for outreach, signage, training, that kind of thing.
And so we're hoping to take some of that, what we've learned, but also taking this opportunity to gather some information from the people on this call about how to best deliver the whirling disease education and promote behaviour change in our regions. For the interactive sessions today, we'll split into some breakout groups to get some discussion going around whirling disease. And the information that we gather from these breakout groups will be used to guide our regional efforts for outreach. We want to capture the different perspectives and backgrounds you have to better understand where the gaps might be and how to best address them and have maximum effect for our educational opportunities. That is all pending funding, so got to keep that in mind too. But as you can see on the screen, there are a bit of a how-to, some instructions on how we're going to go about this, and this will be available in a little demonstration we'll do next. But there'll be CSIS, CCIS, and CMI staff that will act as facilitators to help guide these sessions. And this is the way we'd like to do it. So each group will have a facilitator, one of us. Then we're looking for volunteers to be either speakers to share back with the rest of the group, or a timer as well to keep us on track. So the speaker's job is to provide a summary of the discussion that's had in the larger and share it with the larger group at the end, and the timer keep track of time. So what we're doing is asking 2 questions. There'll be 5 minutes for the first section and 15 minutes for the second question. And we're using the whiteboard system. So this is what we're going to demonstrate in just a moment. And I might let Molly, do that now.
Okay, so I'll stop the share there. I'm going to open up the whiteboard. Just takes a moment to load. Okay, so everybody should be able to see the whiteboard. So there's this first page that we're looking at is just the instructions that Jess just went over, and these are going to be here for our reference. But remember, you're going to have a facilitator as well in your group who's going to can help answer questions. But I want to draw your attention to, on this instruction page, the little red circle. There's a little icon in that circle that looks like number 1 with 2 squares. That icon is on your top left of the screen, and you should see that. And if you click that, which I recommend everyone does right now, a little pane on the left-hand side of the whiteboard will pop up, and it's called Pages. So you should all be seeing that now. And under that Pages pane, there's 3 tabs. There's the Instructions tab, which we're on now, and then there's Question 1 and Question 2. So why doesn't everybody, this is just a demonstration before you go into your breakout group, but why doesn't everyone just practice clicking on Question 1? And that's going to bring you up to a different whiteboard pane where there's a question, and as you'll see, there's some little yellow squares. Those are sticky notes. So once you're in your breakout group, you're going to use those sticky notes to kind of gather some of your thoughts. You can also add more sticky notes. If you look beside the Pages pane, there's a little bunch of tool icons. And one of those looks like a sticky note, like a Post-it. If you hover over it with your mouse, it says sticky note. And those, if you click that, you can add more sticky notes onto the whiteboard. And the idea is that you're going to discuss within your group the question, but you're also going to be recording your thoughts on the sticky notes as well. And after these breakout groups are done, we will save all the sticky notes and the whiteboards will all be saved, and we can capture all your ideas. So then after about 5 minutes on this question, you're going to move to Question 2. And that one is, you're going to spend longer on that one, about 15 minutes. And the timer's job is to remind everyone when it's getting close to 11:30 because that's when we're going to be rejoining the main group again. So around 11:25, the timer should let the group know, hey guys, we got to be wrapping this up. And the speaker should be maybe recording some highlights, like 1 or 2 highlights of the overall discussion that they want to share back with the main group, because we're all going to come back and we're going to just do a quick 2-minute summary of what was discussed. Okay. All right, I think we're ready to be broken into the groups, Haley.
Okay, that's great. I've got your groups all set and ready to go. There is a facilitator with each group, but otherwise they are random assignments, and you've got between sort of like 7 and 10 people in each group. I'm going to open them now, and let's just do a time check. It's 11:12. So I'm going to bring you back into this main space by, we said 20 minutes. I'm gonna stick with 11:30, bringing you back. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for participating in the groups. I think we got a lot of good information in our group. Now we're just going to share back some quick, like 2-minute highlights from our discussions. I'll just call on the speakers of each group to share. So maybe I'll start with our group. Ben is our speaker. So Ben, can you share a couple highlights from our discussion?
Yeah, so for the first question about what whirling disease education would you like to see regionally? We talked about one place was to have information at places where outdoor users are connected, like fishing shops or even Canadian Tire, and then have staff educated to give information to people. Collaboration with other organizations. That it'd be nice if there was some kind of brochures or like easy handout information to talk about like information about the disease, where it's found, and what the decontamination procedure is. And then that concise signage on whirling disease and yeah, that same kind of information. Should I talk about question two also?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, then for question two is what barriers do individuals face in taking action to prevent the spread of whirling disease? So we talked about lack of knowledge, a lack of caring, or people need reasons to think they matter in this. That it's hard for especially recreationalists, all the pre-planning that's needed for the decontamination gear can be really inconvenient for them, and they might not want to spend a whole lot of time in like preparing for that. And then that for different invasive species, there's different approaches that are going to need to be used, and that might be expensive or again hard for the average recreationalist to prepare for.
Awesome. Thank you for that summary. Um, and now let's talk to the speaker from Lori Carr's group.
Okay, that figures me because no one volunteered.
That's okay. I thought that might happen.
We did have a good discussion. So, very similar. We had the same questions. What barriers do individuals face? And then also the first question with regards to general outreach. And there was some discussion about the movement of people from contaminated areas to uncontaminated areas and specifically informing that group. So, Alberta visitors crossing over to the border of BC. There was a note that there's no longer a station at Radium. So, how are those people going to know that they're leaving a contaminated area? So, like highway signage specifically around the borders telling people about this. We also talked about a lack of knowledge around where the specific infected area is, like that the Columbia Basin is. So anybody coming into the Columbia Basin, people still don't know that where exactly the infection area is. And then somebody mentioned that there was some kits available in Norway like a few years ago. So like where you come in and register at the campsite, you would be getting these kits. So making them more available at points of purchase, making them part of boat operator certificates and things like that.
Nice. That's great. That was a great summary. Maybe we'll move to Jess's group speaker.
I was also the speaker. We had an initially shy group, but they came through. And similar to what's been mentioned already, I guess something different that we had, which um, I find comes up a little bit too, is how do you get the people, or I guess it wasn't really a solution or answer to this question, but it was a point that connecting with people that are really recreational and the low level sort of like recreation, like camping, people that are camping and on float trips, and they may not be paying attention to some of the really targeted messaging that is shared more broadly, and how do we kind of interact and engage with those people on a more local level. Um, and there's some great suggestions around like training for local angling groups, whether that be their staff or um, interested members. And lots of other people are sort of suggesting that was a great idea, meeting people where they're at. And maybe if it would be possible to be for information to be shared when buying a fishing license or a recreational fishing license. They were some of the key ones there, with a few other little notes among it. And then for the second question around what examples of effective education campaigns could be applied for the whirling disease context, Caitlin from the Elk River Alliance, she mentioned humour. She provided a little link, which I think it's New Zealand, their government talked to, well, I'm not sure if it's government, but their campaigns around invasive species were how to be nurturing all the time and adding like funny images of, this one, it's like a fish that says, who needs arms to climb? And just like engaging people through humor, and talking about Indigenous food sovereignty and how whirling disease could impact that, and how do we apply that to a whirling disease context, and how do we have a campaign around that, and how a lot of time there's like either an emotional response or people react to numbers, and so impacts of how much it could cost, or a way to kind of maybe shape a campaign. And I think those are the main ones. Corey was mentioning something great as we came back to the main room around how the province does a really good job of talking about avalanche control, and it's like very obvious when you're traveling through these corridors, which I guess in our part of the world are similar and overlapping, and it becomes, everyone kind of knows that that's something you need to be considering and mindful of, and it's on the highway boards as you drive through, it's online, it's everywhere. So he mentioned that as being a really good one.
Great. Yeah, so many good points there. Maybe we'll move to Renee's group, whoever was Renee's speaker.
Yeah, I also had a group where nobody wanted to step up and speak. So, yeah, pretty similar answers for the first question. Some of our points were repeated, but we also talked about the importance of reaching out to in-water recreation groups beyond kind of the standard, kayakers and fishers. But yeah, talking to like the triathlon groups or people that use wetsuits for swimming. We talked about maybe using radio and newspaper to reach audiences that aren't as social media friendly. We talked about it might be nice if there could be professionally led demonstrations for boat decontaminations, like either by the province or potentially by invasive species groups. At key boat launches in certain areas that could be advertised and folks could come out and watch that. And then our second question, I've covered it up. In addition to tools like brochures, websites, and signage, do you have suggestions for other methods that could be used to help change behavior? So we talked about using or having decontamination packages that are ready and available for purchase in outdoor recreation stores, and potentially maybe looking into the subsidization of those materials or those kits. We talked about maybe trying to get a list together of local providers of Quat Plus or other suitable, well, sounds like Quat Plus is the suitable one. We talked about reaching out to folks that use off-road recreational vehicles on the reservoirs, and like highlighting the importance that even though you're not driving in the wet, you could potentially be spreading spores. We talked about increasing the awareness, not just on the steps that need to be taken, but also the potential impacts and why those steps need to be taken. And I think, yeah, one other thing that we said, it would be great is if, in high frequency, like boat launches, for example, if it was possible to look at having a communal decontamination kit that could, like a barrel on site with kits. It's complicated with chemicals, but if that's possible, or even just having access to non-infected water that could be used for rinsing off. Yeah, so those were our main ideas.
Wow. Okay, nice. You guys covered a lot in 20 minutes. That's impressive. And those are really, yeah, the kits came up a lot in our group as well. So I think having the kits seems to be a theme. And then the last one I believe is Kalish's group. So if Kalish had a speaker.
Hi. Yeah, so our group, it's kind of seems like a lot of people had a lot of similar ideas. So a bit of this is going to be, yeah, pushing some of those points home. So for the first question about the regional actions, we kind of had two camps there. One was still focusing a lot on just the resources to inform people. So like the idea of the signage and the social media, still pushing that, and focusing our outreach to the targeted audiences. So that idea of going to meet your target audience to tell them the message that you want, as opposed to expecting the target audience to come to you. And we referenced the pictogram that was brought up during the session that Parks Canada had made. So just sort of thinking about some ways to make the actions more digestible, easier, that they seem achievable for people, and reducing that barrier. And also making sure that that's clear, that the clean, drain, dry is the first step. You can't decontaminate mud, as David kept saying, and just kind of making those pieces a bit more clear for people. And then the second camp for the first question about regional actions focused a lot on the cleaning itself. So sort of copying that how-to video that David presented, or making our own, but same thing, like keeping it really simple, really fast, making it seem digestible and easy for people to do, and also affordable for people to do. And then focusing on like how to build your own kit, and keep that with you, that kind of thing. So reducing the reliance on those stations being available to you at places that you go to. But then we also talked about having stations available for people at locations. And yeah, logistically, and thinking about the costs associated with some of that kind of stuff, but still, so kind of both letting people know how they can do it themselves and build it themselves, but still trying to find a way to provide those stations for people. And yeah, teaching on techniques. And then traveling decontamination stations and giving workshops at popular rec sites. Again, so a bit of both, like trying to really focus on the action, the cleaning, and the decontamination. So the second question, which is the bigger question, so this was about tools in addition to sort of what we already use, which is our brochures and our signage, and looking for new and novel tools for people to break the barriers to the behavior change, which we want to be clean, drain, dry. So we kind of had three camps there. One was focused on trying to incentivize people to do this stuff. And so how can we source funds to pay people to engage in the good behavior that we want. So an idea that came up is something that CCIS has had recently been using, and I think has had some reasonable success with. Anyone that wants details can talk to Laurie Frankham. We're using the Crowdsource app, and so we are literally paying people to do what we want them to do, which is treat invasive plants. So some idea like that, and how that can maybe cross over into the aquatics world. And then that we talked again about having dollars available. So maybe thinking about a way to get youth involved with fundraisers to get some money at outreach events. So incentivizing crowdsource, and then along the idea of in the money camp is reaching out to boat retailers and seeing if we can train them to train the people buying boats. So we start at like basically ground zero. So it's kind of like that train the trainer idea and getting the boat retailer staff to be actually bringing this up with people who buy boats before they even leave the lot. Then the other piece was about laws and enforcement. So trying to think about ways that we could maybe have enforcement move beyond voluntary compliance and considering fines for not decontaminating gear and boat. So we know that there are fines for people who bypass an open inspection station in BC to have your boat inspected, but we're trying to think maybe beyond that. That doesn't just happen only at a provincial inspection station. And then the idea of like, how do we enforce this? Could we put up video cameras in public spaces like a boat launch? And maybe that might not go anywhere, but the person who's not cleaning their boat doesn't know that. And then the third piece we had was about, again, so having maybe traveling. We had two things like permanent stations and traveling stations. So traveling decontamination trailers. So we know that the province of BC has mobile decon stations, but can we maybe have those at a regional level or have more of them moving around the province? And then boots on the ground monitoring at launches. So again, this kind of ties back into the meeting the people where they're at to break the barriers. And then we're talking about, so CKIS is engaged in a clean marina program. And so we're looking at how could we maybe ramp that up and install wash stations at marinas. So not only to prevent aquatic invasive species, but yeah, also exactly teaching people how actually keeping your boat clean is good for the boat itself. And we talk about, people who have their $300,000 wakeboard boats. That's a huge investment. When I did clean, drain, dry education a long time ago, I found that's, I guess, maybe a bit in the money camp as well. Like it's pretty easy to encourage someone to protect their $300,000 investment by letting them know that clean, drain, dry is actually good for the boat itself. And then the secondary piece to that is that it's good for the environment. So those were our key pieces from our
Nice.
group.
That's great. So many good. Yeah, wow. You guys covered a lot. And I feel like ours went by really fast, but it sounds like you guys talked about a lot. Let's just take a couple minutes maybe now if either Martina or Dave have any just sort of like knee-jerk feedback on what you've heard, like if any of those ideas resonated as like seeming like really like important points to explore or just maybe general thoughts.
Sure, thanks, Molly. Wow, so many really, really good ideas, and I applaud you for stimulating this discussion for sure. A couple of sort of high-level comments from everything that I heard. I'm really glad to see people thinking about moving from information like pamphlets and print materials have their place for sure, but to that whole personal action. Um, because we really need to influence people's behavior. So how best to do that? And there was a lot of discussion that I think employed some of the basic principles of what I call community-based social marketing. That whole identifying barriers, which is really, really critical to why people aren't doing the right thing. And then, and that's different for different audiences for sure,
Mhm.
right? So there's a fair bit of work I think needs to happen on identifying who your key audiences are, and then understanding what those barriers are. And then I really like the incentivize comment. How do you reward people? What's the carrot for making them do the right thing? And a really, really good example of that is low flow toilets, right? Like we've done a really, really good job converting people over to use that tool for water conservation. You think about how that happened. You go into hardware stores and they list the toilets, and then they show which ones that you used to be able to get in Alberta, not being Alberta centric, but you used to be able to get a rebate, right? For choosing some of those, and it was as high as $50 or $75. So how do you convert that stuff? And people were talking about and thinking about that kind of thinking to whirling disease. More interactive media. And so really liking the idea of generating mechanisms that involve people. And I'll give you an example, one that stuck in my mind that worked really, really good with the work that we did. So there's an environmental theater group called Evergreen in Alberta, and they put on plays and they take them to schools. And we use them at trade shows and other things. And they latched onto the whole whirling disease thing. And next thing we knew, they had a play, Stop the Swirl. I borrowed the title. And they had an actor that was in this fabric ball that was a myxospore rolling around on the stage demonstrating whirling disease life cycle. And I can tell you that a couple of years after the fact, when I would go do school presentations, everybody would want to bring the myxospore. And most grade 3 kids could talk about whirling disease and at least be somewhat informed about the life cycle of Mixobolus cerebri. That's a grade 3. It was crazy. So all of the ideas about more interactive media, I think, are really, really useful. Yeah, fantastic ideas.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Martina, did anything resonate with you?
Yeah, and this actually resonated from both yesterday when Dave mentioned it in his presentation, and seeing some comments in the chat, and just building off of what he just mentioned. Love the idea of trying to target youth, and whether that's in the classroom or through different events. I know for myself personally, I still remember, I can't remember what grade it was, but when we went and we did the releasing of salmon into the local stream, like that's a very vivid memory for myself. Obviously, I'm probably a little bit biased to remembering that, but more ways that we can create, like obviously we're not going to be wanting to release various species into systems, but ways to connect with those different groups. And another piece that maybe hasn't just separate from what David mentioned, but came up in our group, which was an interesting idea. And, we are working closely with our Ministry of Transportation, is different ways to kind of share the information kind of as people are traveling through. So I think the example is given of like, there's a lot of work done by the province on like avalanche awareness when you're going through like high risk areas in an avalanche area. And we've worked with, and I mean, we still do work with a Ministry of Transportation. They're part of our working group for whirling disease. Obviously, we've been working with them closely for the mussel program, but in the past, we've, kind of used those electronic message boards to share information, passing on like clean, drain, dry. And so that could be something that we revisit to kind of get that information out there, because we do have, of course, existing signs about clean, drain, dry at entry points into the province, but are there ways that we can kind of expand where that information is being kind of captured? Obviously, we want to be expanding more than just, we did talk about, there's lots of signage already. So there's also something to be said about too much signage. So that's, I think, where, the conversations about different ways to share that information. And I think there was a lot of conversation, it sounds like, across all the groups about that great video that David shared, the YouTube video, like how to build a kit, I think is a great, way to say that, some of these tools can be more readily accessible. We have something similar when it comes to like the substrate samplers for invasive mussels is an accessible way that people can kind of become interactive. So how can we, create that similarly for whirling disease? So those are definitely some of the things that kind of resonated for me in terms of, as we've all talked about, just trying to break those barriers and make the information more accessible.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those comments. I just want to remind everybody in the group that we captured all of your thoughts on the whiteboards, hopefully, and then this has been recorded. So CSIS and CCIS are planning to kind of take all that information and save it and then incorporate it hopefully into regional action plans, pending funding this year, that we're going to be on the ground and hopefully implementing some of the suggestions that people gave. So we really value all your time and input today. Maybe I'll pass it back to Haley to close us off.
Sounds great to me. Can you see my slide? Okay, wonderful. David, I just want to say that somebody wants to get in touch with that theater group or see if there's a video available if you look at the chat, if you haven't there. And to that end of sharing information, the chat history is available too. So I will be sharing the chat history with our facilitators and hosts today. So anything you've put in the chat, that information will also be captured and shared. And then at this point in time, I just want to thank everybody very much for their participation. I think we've become a bit of a smaller group, but that in some ways has probably made for a nicer, more fulsome conversation at the end here, and really shows your commitment. So to those of you who are still here with us, thank you so much. Thanks again to our event partners and our sponsors. Thanks to David and Martina for allocating such a large amount of time to this. Molly and Jesse did a great job of these breakout sessions and conversation at the end. So thank you very much for that also. And I personally want to do a shout out to Renee Makis, who is a director with CMI. This event was her idea. So it's come to be because she championed it. So thanks to her. And I have actually, let me just put, Renee, if you could put the evaluation link in the chat, that would be great. I understand that it is 11:57 and you've been online with us for hours and you probably want to go, but we're going to put an evaluation link in the chat. If you do have time to fill it out at some point, that would be wonderful. We want to know how we've done. And it's also an opportunity for you to share any further thoughts with us for us to carry up. And I'll email that information out as well. So the recording from today and yesterday, as I've already mentioned, it will be accessible on the CMI webpage for this particular event. I'll email it out to all registrants as well, and you're welcome to share that resource with your network. Let me just see. I think that's all from me. Anybody else
Everyone's
need to
got the
chime in?
link in there yet. Sorry, Haley, I'm scrambling to find it.
Oh,
I just
Molly's
put it in
done it.
there.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much, Molly. Yeah. Okay, that's wonderful. So thanks everybody. We can sneak away here. I'm gonna let this roll for just a couple minutes so people can snag that evaluation link if they like. And feel free to email me if you have any follow-up questions, concerns, that sort of thing. Thank you.
Thanks,